Thank you, Ann. Also, so you guys have heard about the reports, right? You've actually seen some of them up here in smaller form, the difficult to read. Outside there's a pop-up banner that shows the reports on the banner, right? But you guys haven't had your hands on reports. So we're going to ask that they get passed out now. I'm going to provide you with two reports, example reports. The one will be your farm sustainability report that is more of a producer level report, right? And this is the workshop portion of today. So we will sort of work our way through that report so that you can see what data is actually presented and how it's represented on the report. The second piece of information that you'll get is one that's been aggregated. So you'll see multiple states. This is a pork board level report. So this would be the very critical piece that Ann was talking about in terms of anonymity and confidentiality, and being able to scale that information, that data, being able to aggregate it on a larger basis. She mentioned something, with working with the individual states that's pretty important, because as states are faced with environmental challenges, being able to present this to the state legislature is very critical, right? To being able to say, here's what our pork producers are doing within the state. It sets them apart from maybe some of the other livestock commodities or avian commodity groups, right? Because as far as I know, nobody else is doing something like this in the other commodities. On the national level, we have that same opportunity, right? We can aggregate this data. It's anonymous to us. We don't see it. We don't have access to it. We can't tell who's submitting the reports to us, but we can provide that on a national level to provide that to our sister organization, National Pork Producers Council, that could then go to the legislature and say, here are the real numbers, right? We know what's being said out there about pork producers, but here are the real numbers in terms of what they are. The second piece of that, when we talk about real numbers, it doesn't take you very long, a bunch of smart people here in the room, that you know that these are a model, right? Ann is collecting field soil type, field edges, putting it into a model, and that model is spitting the information back out. And as we get better and better information, we drill test wells to test the nitrogen content of the soil. We are better able to put in individual feed ingredients into the diet so we can more accurately represent the nutrients that are available. As we get better and better data, our models, our output from those models get better and better, right? So that's a critical component of it as well. So I had passed out to you two sustainability reports. The first one that I will direct your attention to has the little QR code at the top of it. Okay, so look at that one. It says Your Farm Sustainability Report, a 2021 On-Farm Practices Report. So this would be for an individual farmer. Okay, so this would be what you would be looking at for your clients or for your farm itself. And so I'm just going to ask you a series of questions. This is the workshop piece of it. So we're going to ask you to actually raise your hand and give me a response back when you find the answer as we walk through these. And then at the end, I want you to turn to your neighbor and discuss a little bit about what ideas might you have as someone who would use this report in a variety of ways. So what are some of the unique ways we could use these reports? And then we'll be dismissed to a break. So the first question I have for you is, what is the total swine inventory on this report? Who's got it? 7,500. So 7,500 animals on this report on the swine side. How many acres are planted in buffer zone? 4 acres in buffer zone, right? Planted in buffer zones, 4 acres. What's the ratio of corn to soybeans planted in terms of acreage or percentage? 52 to 48, a 1-to-1 ratio, right? Which is pretty standard. It depends on the price of soybeans or the price of corn, and if you can turn on a dime and make those changes in your planting strategies. But that's a pretty standard Midwestern, upper Midwestern farm to plant corn and soybeans in that ratio like that, in that rotation. What percentage of field acreage is planted to cover crops? 20. Yeah, 20%. It's in that pie chart. That's demonstrated there with tillage practices as well. So those pie charts show us the percentage that's planted in cover crops at 20%. And what is the estimated soil erosion rate? Who sees that one? Clear in the back. 0.45? I think it's 0.45. Yeah, tons per acre. And how does that compare to the national average tons per acre of erosion? Yeah, it's significantly lower, right? I mean, the national average is 4 point something, it says it there, right? So because of the tillage practices and the cover crops that are being used, that the amount of soil erosion that's occurring is greatly reduced. And Dale even said soil erosion is probably one of the critical components, one of the things that's most important to him in terms of the aspects of the report that's important to him. How much less CO2 equivalents did the infield practices save for this farm? Say it again. 81. Yep. So 81 CO2 equivalents reduction because of their infield practices as an output for this. So you think about that. I don't actually know what a CO2 equivalent is. You were going to ask that question. How do you calculate it? Yeah. You plug it in the computer and the computer spits it out. That's the answer you wanted. Ann might give us the actual answer to that.
Yeah, so we utilize USDA NRCS models of choice to calculate greenhouse gas emissions. It's nitrous oxide, methane, and CO2. All spun up together, and then there's the carbon sequestration as well. So those pieces all are utilized to calculate that, and then it's showing practice change. So the benefit of certain practices and how we can put that to cars off the road and things of that nature, because we want to make sure that we can picture what a ton of carbon is, because that's not something you see every day.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You know, we try to put the output of this report is tried to be presented in such a way. CO2 equivalence for me is pretty intangible. I don't actually know what that is. I probably burned a lot of CO2 equivalents on my flight up here, right, to Minneapolis. We burned a lot in our SUVs that we drive around, or the Super Duty trucks that we have that travel around. So we don't know what those are, but through modeling, we can actually put it on a scale or a measure that many consumers can appreciate, right? And that helps our producers tell their story in a better way. And so so what is the answer to that? How many cars do we take off the road in terms of CO2 equivalents? I think it says it there. 16, right, for this one operation. So that's a little bit about, I just wanted to walk you through one of the reports so you get accustomed to seeing them and seeing what those outputs look like. So I would ask just to spend a couple of minutes with your neighbor or brainstorm within your own brain maybe, but just discussing how you might use these reports. Dale mentioned today that he shares them with his landlord. I'd never thought about that, right? So what are some of the ways, and then we'll come back and I'll take those from the audience in terms of how we might use the output from the report. So just take a couple of minutes and we'll do that. I don't know what time it is, but we're getting close. Thank you. Passing it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, actually, I think it was Larissa Odlin? Carissa Odlin? I think she's the one that brought it up. I think she's the one that brought it up. Okay. All right, we'll just take a couple more seconds here. Great conversation you guys are having. I'm giving you a round of applause for that. Woo! Right? It's one of those things, you turn people loose and you hope you get their attention back. And so grateful for the conversation that you all were sharing with each other. It sounded like, from what I could eavesdrop around the room, that you were discussing the issue at hand in most cases. And sometimes maybe there was just a little bit of getting to know your neighbor a little bit. So I'm grateful for that opportunity as well. So what are some of the ways that you think about being able to use this information that's available to us? Just willing to open it up.
Rick had a great comment.
Rick, what was your great comment?
So it really wasn't so much how we use the information, it's how do we, it's sustainability. How do we sustain the information?
Yeah.
How do we analyze it to know that it's doing what we want it to do? How does Dale know that you're going to be supporting it 2 or 3 years from now? So my thought was more long-term plan and keeping the ball rolling and paying for it down the road and analyzing it to convince other folks besides ourselves that we're doing some good with it.
Yeah.
So, and I guess that's a use of it. Yeah, it's but it's more, how do we use the information not just internally, but externally?
Yeah,
Just I'll put words in his mouth.
Yeah.
In his mouth here. What are the incremental points of success?
That was the word, incremental.
Yeah, so we first started out, as Dale said, he participated in the pilot projects, right? There was a few sort of farms that were willing to come alongside and to test drive this sort of a minimum viable product that we had. Now, as we're getting more and more, we're up to 112 farms across the United States that are participating in it. At some point in time, we hope that it is a self-perpetuating and self-sustaining type of effort. We think it is of extreme value for our pork producers, and so as an organization, we support this monetarily, and we support it by putting staff members towards this data. Sustainability, no offense, but you've been around a while, I think, and so these trends sort of come and go. But as Ashley said earlier, this one might be sticking these days, guys. There's money that is to be made in this space by a lot of people that are on the outside of agriculture. That Goldman Sachs was the one that she mentioned. So because there's money in this space, it tends to sort of take on a life of its own. And I think that we as an organization feel like it's worth committing to. For at least the next 5 years, we've made that commitment, and probably even farther down the road. We cannot, as an organization, because we have a new board of directors each year, we cannot hold next year's board of directors accountable for what this year's board of directors decisions are made. So we can never say, yes, we're going to support this 10 years from now, but we certainly see it as an opportunity for our producers to be able to partner with them in telling their story in a much better way. So other ways that we can use this information. Ezekiel.
I think one of the key topics in our discussion was to know our current status, what's the desired goal, identify the gap, and develop the strategy that would put us there. And of course, access to capital.
Yeah.
What else?
We also spoke about maybe this being an opportunity to detect some good practices being done in different farms and bringing that to the general public, creating a network among producers to share this kind of practices so they can all grow together and bring each other up to reach these goals.
Yeah, it sounds like utopia, right? I mean, that utopian type of environment where we learn from each other. But my grandfather did that around the coffee table right, at the local, well, now we have a convenience store, but he used to go to the coffee shop and sit around. Before it was Starbucks. They didn't have Starbucks back then. But they would talk about the management practices along with how much rain they got, right? But they would talk about their management practices and what was successful. And so he learned a lot from his peers in the community, what was working for them. So a way to do this on a larger scale, right, is to share that the information and those best management practices so that we can continually improve. I like what you said, Ezekiel, about the ability to find the gaps. Once we get this aggregated data, now we can begin to really hammer down on what it is that we need to know from a research standpoint. How can we feed this to make it so that we have a better output at the end of the day? Sarah.
Playing off of just the recent comments, I'm Sarah Mikesel with the Pig Site. And so we have an international footprint. And I can tell you what we know is that there are two things that producers like to read about. They like to read about research and what's new, and they like to hear from other farmers. And this is the perfect kind of information to create case studies, whether they're anonymous or whether they're with folks like Dale. And I've interviewed Dale a couple times with this pilot program when it was in the pilot stage and as he's doing it now. And producers love to hear this kind of stuff. And it helps, I think, to give them the confidence to do the same thing, right? To not only do a program like this, but to start talking about it to other people. And the reason why I said we have a global footprint is because, you know, there are a lot of people, I think, in Europe who don't think that the United States is raising pigs right? And things like this help build the story to tell a different story. And there's a global story to be told about sustainability in the U.S. pork industry, and there's a local story to be told, I think. So I think that this is the kind of stuff that you could do really great things with from a case study standpoint. Again, whether they're anonymous, because obviously this is people's data and we want to be careful with that. But I know you have people in your industry like Dale who are willing to come out and say, here's what's going on in my industry or on my farm.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Pedro or Ezekiel again?
No, the best thing is that you can also leverage, I think from my perspective, you could also leverage this information to engage internal employees. Because they are the ones, in the ultimate case, they are the ones on a day-to-day basis impacting the way that we produce pork.
Yeah, if we don't tell our story, they'll tell our story for us, and we don't want that, right? So, yeah. Pedro. Yep.
Playing a little bit of the consumer here, and I mean, I see, okay, in this report, it was less than the national average, right? But then maybe the consumer will come back and say, well, what is that national average? And I want improvement, right? I don't want you to tell me that you are doing well, or we got lucky and we pick a good farm, or what it is, but as a consumer, I want improvement. And if I see a 5.9 soil erosion, we just said soil erosion could be the point that I should look at, then who's that above this number, and what are we gonna do to get them to go lower? Because I think that's the consumer is gonna ask us that.
Yeah, that's a very good point, you know, and certainly a big piece of this right now is just building that baseline, right? We got to be able to tell that story 5 years from now and how we've made those improvements over time, right? It'd be wonderful if rising tides lift all ships, right? And we could show a national average for soil erosion that begins to decrease over time, right? And show that we're on an aggregate basis, we're getting better and better and better. So perhaps just as I said that, I thought to myself, well, we could have the Iowa soil erosion average, we could have the national soil erosion average, and we could have the folks that are engaged in the in the your farm sustainability reports, we could have their average as well, right? So we could tell it in 3 different ways. So, yeah, good.
Average is any industry, right? This is not average from pork producing businesses, right?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I have to defer to Ann. Yeah, that's whole soil average, right? Yep. Yeah, it wouldn't include construction sites or golf courses, things like that. Give me one more way that we can use this data, and then I'll let you go. Carissa.
We actually had a question, I guess. More, I love the story that Dale is able to share, but for a producer that maybe doesn't have as much of the closed loop,
Yeah.
I guess we're just, curious how some of those producers have been able to use this information and kind of what that report looks like for them.
Yeah, so that's a good observation and a good question. Does anybody here from Iowa Select? Do we have Iowa Select in the room? Okay. Iowa Select just released in their latest newsletter that they send out, I believe once a month, they released findings for this report, kind of the results of their effort. Iowa Select doesn't own much land, right? So their manure goes out and is applied. So they have used that relationship with their applicator, their manure applicator, to get information about the land that the applicator is applying to. And that's how they put land into their system, right? So it may not be that you have an entire closed loop, but there are ways that you can be ingenious about how you can go out and get data about the farm where your manure is being applied, or get information and data about your ingredients that are being the land where your crops are being grown if you don't grow them. So there are ways to do that. And Iowa Select, if you have an opportunity to look up their latest newsletter, they just do a wonderful job of telling that story, and just a really good job with that. So anyways, I hear you when you say we need more a barn-centric versus a field-centric option for our producers, right? Because many of them are contract growers, right? They don't have sort of this, the whole loop settled. And so there are some things that we can do. You think about management practices in the barn that would change their CO2, feeding synthetic amino acids, adding 1%, what's that? Putting in LED lights, using solar panels, right? Some of those things that they have much more control over, we do have an opportunity to begin to build that into the model. So, Ann?
And one other piece that I would add is, so there's a suite of reports that come with participating in the project. So this would be one level to dive really into telling the manure story, because that is such a hot button topic, and it's something that we need to make sure we're tackling and hitting head on, because it's one of the first conversations that people that are unfamiliar with swine and agriculture are going to hit on first. And so the manure piece is really vital. With that, there are other reports that we only have so much time to go through today, but that do hit on specifically the site itself. And so we want to understand that, the 10 acres that the actual pigs are on, or the 5 acres that the actual pigs are on, are having an impact, and a positive one at that, on 300, 400 acres surrounding that site. But also that data is coming in at the site level itself as well. And that's where we'll be able to provide information on what a full carbon footprint is as we look at the inputs and outputs of pork production at that site.
Yeah. All right, folks. Again, thank you so much for being willing participants in this sort of discussion portion of it. We're going to turn you loose for a break for a few minutes at least. I think we've used all your break time, so sorry, you can't go out there and get